I've always been interested in contributing to open source projects. What's a good way to get started? Love that question because there's so many good ways to get started. You could get started by just helping triage issues. So many open source projects have issues where the maintainers, they don't know if it's a real bug or not. A lot of repositories also have what are called good first issues. Home Assistant is this cool open source org. In Home Assistant, look at that. They have 2.9K issues. Do you see that? They have so many labels. That's amazing. Good first issue. Aha! They've already got some here where it's like, this is a good first issue for you to take on and fix. And also generally just thinking, what are some projects that I use, that I care about, that I might be able to help with?
Hi developers. VS Code users can now access a powerful new code completion model, GPT-4o Mini. This model has been trained on over 275,000 high-quality public repositories covering more than 30 programming languages. You can expect this model to provide more accurate suggestions and better performance. To enable it, if you have Command Center enabled, click down the arrow next to the Copilot icon, select Configure Code Completions, choose Change Code Completions Model, and you're set. Alternatively, if you're using the command palette, you can press Ctrl-Shift-P for Windows or Linux, or Command-Shift-P for Mac. Type Change Completions Model, select your preferred model from the dropdown, and that's it. Happy coding!
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Open Source Friday, the show where we talk to maintainers about the apps they're maintaining. I'm Kedasha, and I'm so happy that you're here with us today. Super duper excited about today's episode. I know I say this all the time on Fridays, so excited, but I really am. I'm always so excited whenever I come on here to talk to the maintainers. Today, we're chatting with Elvis about Reflex. And Reflex allows you to create full stack applications on the web with just Python. What? I am so intrigued by this project and I can't wait to learn all about it. But let me know where you're joining from. I'm here in Chicago. Again, very, very cold in Chicago. It's like freezing. I can't wait for spring and summer. But let's pop Elvis on so we can get the conversation started. Hi, Elvis.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I guess
How
quick
are
intro.
you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm Elvis, him, his. I live in SF, and I work at a startup called Chalk. We do real-time ML infra, and so I end up using Reflex a bunch to build like internal apps, internal dashboards, because we're doing a bunch of cool ML data stuff. Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about it and share how it works.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So I see Nigeria is here, South Carolina is here, and you're here from San Francisco. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess let's just jump into the conversation because time
Cool.
goes really fast on
Yeah.
these streams when we're having fun. So tell us a bit more about Reflex. Like, how did you get involved in Reflex and what is it?
Yeah, so actually the way that I found out about Reflex is I was building a ton of internal tools and a lot of like pipelines, and I was essentially working as almost a team of one. This is at another early stage startup called Warp, and I was looking for something where I could build dashboards or tooling for my teammates to use and essentially like trigger things to happen, right? And since I'm like primarily proficient in Python, and I was trying to like keep essentially my velocity as a developer, I was looking for something where I could keep writing Python, but then also build an internal tool, internal app, dashboards. Yeah. And so I stumbled upon Reflex and I've been loving using them ever since. So, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So you were
Yeah.
just looking for a way to keep coding with Python and build
Yeah.
applications that you can share and stumbled upon Reflex.
Definitely.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. And so were you like a part of the maintainer crew or were you just purely a contributor?
Yeah, primarily a contributor. And so I pretty much became kind of a little bit obsessed once I found it because I could do so many things and make my work more visible.
Yeah.
So I'm on the contributor side. they have a small team here in SF. I think they're around like 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a bunch of work and definitely making the framework bigger.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I guess like let's just jump right into it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Let's see Reflex in action and all the good stuff.
Yeah, totally. So this is the main repository. So it's this Reflex dev slash Reflex, and they have a pretty Apache 2 license. I'll actually go to the next page, which is their website. And so I try to start off with the website actually because if you look at this, you would never guess that all of this is like written in Python, right? Like I could actually
Wow.
talk to AI and be like, how does Reflex work? I guess is probably the backend is buggy. Yeah, and so the cool thing is that when you look at this web page as a regular developer, you'd be like, oh, like they put in a lot of work on the JavaScript side to like make this happen. But you can actually like click this logo and then like jump to the actual repository and like see all the code for this website and have it be all in Python. And so that to me, when I saw this, I was like, whoa, this is a lot more expressive than like Streamlit. Like I could actually build a tool that's more powerful,
Yeah.
more flexible. And so this is the first thing I saw, and this essentially gave me good signals because I was like, they're using Reflex themselves, right? So it's nice to use a tool that you're building. And so the fact that they're using it for their own website was promising.
I didn't realize that their website was using Reflex, but I mean, it makes sense that they would use their tool to create their own web app.
Yeah.
That's a really good proof of concept. The website is really good and it's very fast.
Yeah, it's super fast. You can also change like the to light mode and things.
Of course.
Yeah, really good for charts. Really good for dashboards.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I guess to give a little bit of insight into how Reflex actually works. So I guess some of the goals for Reflex, it's mostly to be able to let people work in one language. And the idea is if you're a small team, you just move much faster if you don't have to like maintain two different programming languages, right? Especially for people that are doing like machine learning or data engineering who are working primarily in Python. It's like having them learn JavaScript for the sake of making a dashboard is like huge overkill. And so so it's batteries included. And so what this means is that Reflex, I think it's easy for people to look at Reflex and think it's just a UI framework, but it's actually a full website framework. And what I mean by that is that you can write both your backend and front end all in Reflex, and then Reflex will manage essentially turning your backend into like a fast API backend. And then this front end up here actually ends up turning into React. And then they connect the two with WebSocket. Yeah. And so the beautiful thing is that since all of these UI components are essentially the underlying primitive is React, you can kind of do anything that you've ever seen on the web. And so if you have like a specific React chart or library that you want to wrap in Reflex, you can actually wrap it, and then you can make that a Reflex component, and then you can have like other teams at your company do it, right? So if you're a company with like internal style guides, it's like you can have one front end person that's good at both Python and JavaScript, just like building components for the rest of the organization, and then they can use components that your company's maintaining all in Python, and they don't have to learn a new language. So it's great for developer velocity and experience.
Interesting. That is such a wild concept to me that it all just bundles up into React and then a fast
totally.
API on the back end.
Yeah, it's spectacular.
That is amazing. But do you know how Reflex is handling the complexity of like the front end interactions that traditionally relies on JavaScripts?
Yeah.
Like
So
JavaScript
that's the
events.
selling point, right? I think we actually have a blog post here. Let me show you. Okay, so this is actually super helpful. And so what ends up happening is you have this Reflex app, and then you have an end user. And so whenever someone clicks like a UI component, for example, we'll just have like a React hook that will send this event back to your backend. And then this is what's going through the WebSocket. And then on the backend, you have a bunch of, you have essentially event handlers. And so the event handlers can essentially run through your code base, look at your different state variables, and then they can make changes, like underlying changes with regards to state. And then they have a state manager that will then send events back to your front end, right? And the nice thing is that they manage like building out a queue, an event queue. And so like you can have like async operations, you can have multiple things still outputting. Yeah, and so it's like really flexible. And the cool thing, I'll actually go to some, let me go to some code so I can show you how this works. So if you open up this counter app, so I'm actually going to do split screen. And so the way that this looks like, so this is a simple counter app. Like I can, so if I run this app, okay, open up my localhost. So I can like increment, decrement, I can also randomize, right? But if you look at the code for this, so on my right, we have this function. I can call this function whatever I want. But this function is essentially, one thing is it's declarative. And so we're laying out all of our UI components in a declarative way. And then each of the components, one, there's a ton of components, right? Like everything from like buttons to menus to gradients to charts, etc. And so the nice thing is that all of these components are a class. And so you can actually like, if you like jump into this button class, you can see all of the fields that are in this class, right? Yeah. And so the nice thing is that you can also do like styling in line with regards to that UI component. But then Reflex also has, you also have this app. And in this app, you can pass in a theme and you can pass in things like a Tailwind style sheet or things like that. And then everything will inherit the styles. So they've done the work of like making all of these components like actual Python classes, which makes it easy to work with. And it also makes it very readable, right? Because yeah. And so like we can it's very easy to follow what the UI
I
is
was
doing
just gonna
because
say,
it is
like,
declarative. Yeah.
without even knowing Reflex or how to use it, I can like follow the code and what's happening there.
Yeah, totally. So in this case, right, we have a card, a vertical stack, and then we have a horizontal stack. And so this horizontal stack is going to have our buttons, so left, middle, right. And so we can see that this maps to decrement, to randomize, and increment. And then the different types of components have different types of event handlers. So like a button, for example, has an on click, but a slider might have like essentially when you're dragging it and you let go, that might trigger an event, and then we'll send the value of that slider back to your backend. And so the cool thing is how you actually map these, right? And so this onClick will essentially call this random function, which is attached to your state. And so if I go up to my state, I can see we have a function called random that actually manages receiving that event and then taking whatever logic we need to happen. And so in this case, we're going to generate a random integer, and then we're going to set this to count. And so I can see that my state class, right? And I can have a bunch of different states, right?
I see.
Yeah, like I can have a state for, let's say, like a grid, and then I can have a state for like some UI components. I can have a state for my like side nav bar. And then these states tend to be global. And so when I'm in it, so like if I were to move this to another page, like this our UI, I would just import this same state, and then I can reference it just as I am here. And so having different
the
states
state is
yeah, go for it.
So the state is global by default?
Yeah, for the most part. But you can also, there's also a component called like component state, which lets you make, like I could, for example, have particular logic that I want just for like certain nav bars or a certain set of buttons, and then I could like duplicate them. And so there are escape hatches to like have states that you can duplicate and then use in different places. Yeah. But the nice thing though is that we have this state variable called count. And so Reflex will essentially manage like, hey, like any UI component connected to this count, once this count is changed, I'm going to go send that event off to our UI, and then I'm going to make the necessary updates for you. Yeah. And the nice thing is that since Reflex is managing that, like we can literally have both our front end and back end all in one file, right? Which is like amazing, yeah.
It is amazing, but is it like, the best, architecture decision to like have both in the same
but
file?
this is totally optional, right? Like I can move this to a different file, and then I'll just import my state, right? And so I guess I can show you a little bit of a more complex example. So like we have it's compiling localhost. Let me close this one. So like we have this Wordle app, right? And I mean, would you have a guess for this Wordle app? Just five
No.
letters. No, yeah, I hate Wordle.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, but I guess we can actually just like I can just like look at the code for this, right?
Yeah.
So if we jump into the code for this, like I don't know, we can take
Okay.
let's do Emacs. So let's say I type Emacs, press enter. Nice. We can see E and S are correct, right? But if we look at the code for this, make this a bit. Let me zoom out a bit more. Right. So we have this class, and the nice thing is that we can import this class into another place. Yeah, and so you can see we have a bunch of different functions with regards to guesses, and whether it's correct, and the game status. And the nice thing is that these functions can also return UI components themselves, right? So this function can run and then it can return a toast, right? And so the toast is something that you can run on the front end. Cool, but this is the actual state for the game, right? So we have a current guess, and then we have the word, and I think the word is the one we're trying to guess. And then we can have these functions. And the nice thing is that different event handlers essentially have different input types. And the nice thing is that these are all strongly typed, right? So like in the case of like a slider, that might give you back 2 or 3 different parameters into that function. And so you just need to make sure that this function will take in all the input parameters. But Reflex is pretty good about type checking and telling you like whether or not, these things match. Because one of the difficult things, especially on the engineering side of building something like Reflex, is our front end. Our front end, this is all, you're technically in JavaScript land, right? And so like we can't write an if else statement in Python in this component, because you're technically in JavaScript world right now. And so Reflex has things like RxCon, and this is essentially a wrapper around JavaScript's, if else. And then we just have a way for you to like hook into that JavaScript function using things like RxCon, or there's something called like for each. So this is like looping through. And so they're doing the work of like actually transpiling all of this Python into JavaScript. And so that's one of the things that's a bit hard to get used to when you're first starting out, is not realizing like, hey, like all of this is actually JS, but because you're not, and so it's like, how do I know, like, essentially, okay, I can't use this particular function because this is purely Python, but then I can have Reflex, do something for me, or give me some function that actually does that for me. That way all of this still works.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so like match is a good example. Like this is a switch statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting, Elvis. I will say.
Yeah.
Can you show us kind of?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you have like the Reflexes repository. If you could show us how, for example, Reflex is handling like DOM manipulation, for example, in their code base. So I'm very curious how it's working under the hood. Like I know you said like it all bundles up to React, but I'm curious how that all works.
Actually, I'm just gonna use GitHub search. Then let's do like I think button is the easiest example. Okay, so I guess form is also good. So we go into the code for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So nice, yeah. I guess we can do the form, right? So we have essentially a base HTML class in the case of button, and then you're actually having all of the, I guess, HTML attributes as like they're all saved in this particular class. And then the idea is that this base HTML will get converted like literally as a string, I think at compile time, and then it gets turned into your underlying HTML. And then I guess we can probably jump into, oh, cool. And then I guess the second thing is that all of these different elements have, the different event handlers. And so we can see that like, I want to see an easier one. Yeah, cool, yeah. So like I can see like this is when I create like this form class, like actually taking in a bunch of children. And so the nice thing is that that's how we were able to write that UI that's declarative and you have things nested, is because you'll just build like a tree and then pass in components into each other. And then Reflex will go through and unwrap each component, right? And so you can see we'll check whether or not like we have an on submit, and then depending on whether we have an on submit event for this form, we can like do different behavior. And then you can see that props will get passed down, and then you'll essentially loop through your children and then essentially run this create function.
Of course.
Yeah. This is how it
Very
works.
interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I guess like the Reflex team in their goals, they just wanted to be able to use Python across the full stack whenever and allow engineers to do the same.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I think this is another quick example actually. So if we go to the website, so here are a couple of case studies, right? And so like for example, like this baseline, they're a YC company that finished the batch recently. And the cool thing about them is that they were a team of 2 people, right? So this is a bunch of people who came kind of from the investment hedge fund world, and they wanted to start a company for this particular space. And for them, they were like, hey, like our background is like, we're like quants, right? Like we're writing Python all day. We don't have JavaScript experience, but we're also like directors, right? We're like essentially like senior staff engineers. And so for us, it's like our being able to like stay in one language, especially if you're not familiar
Yeah.
with JavaScript, is incredibly helpful with regards to your velocity, especially if you're a small team. And then the eventual goal, typically, right, you would think is like, hey, once we have a Series A or get bigger, we can start actually dedicating more resources to having a dedicated front end team. But for them, because Reflex was actually still flexible enough to do everything that they wanted, they actually didn't need to do that. So they're still using Reflex even to this day, even though they have like customers and things.
That is very interesting and
Yeah.
amazing.
And so I guess, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, yeah. So I was saying like the work for Reflex is just like how do we increase the surface area of things
Yeah.
that we can convert for on your behalf, right? To increase the tools you have in building for the web.
And the tool is scalable enough to handle like production grade applications.
Yeah, because
as-
it is
as-
just turning into a fast API, right? So like that's
Right,
the
right,
cool
right,
part,
right.
right? Yeah, it's because so it's like you're building on the right building blocks. Yeah.
Very interesting. We have
Yeah.
a question here.
Totally.
So is the Reflex embedded HTML and JavaScript available to be customized before it outputs to the browser?
Before it up, yeah, totally. So, I guess let me go back to this counter example. But so when I did Reflex run, I can ls into this. Let me just open this back up. There's a .web folder, and so if you look at .web, this is what things get turned into, right? So I can look at my index, and so this is when I'm running Reflex run. This is essentially the output on the JavaScript side. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of hard to read, right? Yeah, and so you can actually edit this. And so another thing that you could do as well is if you wanted to, you could write UI in Reflex, just export it, write no state, and then just use the JavaScript that's emitted from your UI code. If you're like a backend developer that's like, I want to make some UIs, but I don't want to actually learn JS, but I don't really need to make an app. I just want to make components for someone else to use. It's like you can do this also in Reflex with Reflex export.
Interesting. So editing the .js file will it will like maintain the edit. So like when it's like bundled again to go to the web, it doesn't like rewrite.
It won't. It's all code gen. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So like if we edit the file, how does the edits that we make
I
remain
see. So
persistent?
if you
Like, yeah.
if you edit anything in .web, those won't be persistent unless you like save them yourself. Because it is all code gen on Reflex front or Reflex export. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And somebody says RIP performance. And yeah, I was gonna ask a question about performance. Like what does performance look like in Reflex? Because sometimes when we use JavaScript's frameworks, it's already so heavy and it impedes the performance. So what does performance look like on the front end with Reflex?
Yeah.
Do you if you know?
I mean, it's React, right? It gets turned into Next.js. I think the best example of this. So, have you ever heard of AG Grid?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so AG Grid is like pretty much the fastest grid JavaScript library, and so a lot of like pretty much if you're working at a bank, everyone's using AG Grid, just because latency matters in that kind of space. And so there's
Yeah.
actually, for example, a Reflex wrap of AG Grid, right? And
What?
so yeah, totally, yeah. So I don't know if they have anything like I don't think there's an example of AG Grid on the GitHub that I could show, but you could definitely like use something like AG Grid and then start doing things. Let me double check real quick. So I go back to Reflex.
Interesting.
Yeah, there should be an example actually. So okay, AG Grid Finance. Okay, so
While you're doing that, do you know if there are any plans in the future for the code to be bundled in additional libraries? So like it bundles to React. Is there Vue or Svelte or
uh,
Angular?
I'm not sure to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think there was at one point talks about potentially Astro, especially with
yeah.
lazy loading and stuff.
Hmm.
They have really nice lazy loading. Yeah, so this is
I
this
mean,
is
I
for
will.
example AG Grid. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. I will say, I mean, yeah, I mean, I use Streamlit a lot, because I do like working in Python.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
this is so much more flexible, and
Super
you can
flexible.
build some really robust applications with Reflex.
Yeah, and I think I think my favorite example of this actually is there's another Reflex contributor who's maintaining this open source project called Buridan, which is a UI
Mm.
framework that he's building on top of Reflex. So think like
Ah,
yeah, think like ShadCN, right? It's like something like an equivalent, but for the Python community. And so like if you look at his website, he's building out components that have an opinionated design pattern and things.
I love
Yeah,
that.
totally. Yeah, and he's taken a lot of care, especially on styling, to like make things super nice. Uh, yeah, and so I could like probably like go over and I can see like these are some pretty charts, very very nice charts. Yeah, and then all of these components you can just pull out of box and start using them, and then just plugging in data. And the nice thing is that for ML people in particular, it's like you can pass in a data frame or dictionaries directly into the components, and then it's like now I'm displaying data super quickly. So even if it's just for like personal data analysis, it's also a nice tool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I really like that.
yeah. This is a cool project. I'm using his components for actually a personal project. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I'm definitely gonna be using Reflex, honestly.
yeah, totally.
Because
Yeah, it's awesome.
I I code in JavaScript. I worked professionally as a UI engineer, but
Hmm.
JavaScript has sometimes it's just too much. The
It
JavaScript
is
ecosystem can be so overwhelming with all the changes that's happening all the time, the different
forever
frameworks,
changing.
the libraries.
Yeah,
I tend to stick with React and that's it, but it would be nice to stay
yeah.
in the Python world, to be honest.
It's also like since you already know React, you can wrap your own components, and for you, you can actually debug
Right.
things easier because you already have that background.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Most recently, I've been using Astro to do web stuff because,
hmm,
much like Reflex, it just works out of the box and it's very
just works.
simple, very minimal.
Yeah,
But Reflex is amazing.
yeah, totally.
If y'all have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep, chatting.
I have one thing to show you as well.
Yeah.
So for people that are getting started, you can go to templates, and there's a bunch of
Hmm.
templates out of the box that you can use. Like there's this Llama index template if you're doing LLM stuff, or if you're trying to do RAG. There's actually a
Hmm.
repository, LLM examples. And so there's a bunch of like
Oh,
already built out LLM apps here for different use cases. And the nice thing is that since it's all of this is in Reflex, you don't need like Streamlit, and you can do more things and actually deploy this and eventually like sell something.
wow.
Yeah, I can
So
show. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is the Reflex ecosystem is growing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like this has, almost 1,000 stars by itself, and this is probably only a couple months old, this repository. And then the last thing I wanted to show though is that Reflex is also doing things around making it easier to go 0 to 1. And so if I were, so like typically when I like get started with this project, you do after, let me make a virtual environment really quickly. So if you make a virtual environment and then after you install Reflex, you just do Reflex init. And that's how you get started with the project. But the cool thing is that in addition to being able to choose from templates, you can also, like for example, select number 1, generate a template using AI. And then I'll jump into essentially this web app builder. And so I'm actually going to go into this one. And so we could ask Reflex, using AI to like build my initial draft of my app. And so I don't know if you have anything you'd want me to ask it to build. We can just try to test it out live.
A developer portfolio landing page. A developer landing page. I don't know.
Oh, nice.
I'm hard coming up with ideas on the spot like that.
Yeah, same. That's my issue. Let's run this.
Reflex.build.
Yeah. So let me close this. So I guess it's loading. So it has our chat here. And so I guess it starts off by making a plan. So it's gonna essentially make a plan for what it is to do, for what it's gonna build. So you can see it wants layout structure, etc., etc. And then it actually had already finished. I was just like, looking at the plan. But I can close this window and I can see that it's making a state for my portfolio. And so we can see that these states are just essentially our data objects, like our project data, our experience data, etc. Now it's starting to make components. So I guess this is going to be our hero. So I guess I'm a full stack developer.
And what model are they using?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
my guess is
'cause it does.
Cloud is usually pretty good for code gen,
Yeah.
especially with the tool use. So it's probably Cloud with a bunch of tool use.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because if it's just working, it doesn't look like it's a bring your own model type of thing.
Yeah. And I guess the nice thing is
Wow.
that like you're just trying to go 0 to 1, and then have some landing point. And then I think it's actually loading the app.
So cool.
Yeah. Yes, Next.js is loading. Yes, I guess this is it right here. And I think the cool thing is that this is running in the browser, and so I can very easily just download this code. But then there's also a variation of this AI web builder where you have a repository that you're already working on, and then you can open up localhost for that repository, and then you can essentially start editing the repository live with AI. And so the nice thing is that I can like click on different components, and then I can prompt individual components, and then the AI will essentially edit the component and then write it back to my local storage. So there's also like a local version of this kind of workflow where you're not just like creating something from scratch, but you already have something, and then you're essentially just editing it and prompting it with an LLM. Which is pretty powerful. Yeah. So I can jump.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions here in the chat. So the first one is,
yes.
I volunteer, teach high school students. I plan to add Reflex to my toolbox. Yay. Do you recommend any curriculum currently available? Does Reflex have any like curriculum available for teachers or guides?
Yes.
I guess like
there's a couple of people who've literally written. Yes, this is the best one. Coding entrepreneurs. Yeah, I guess I have ads. Yeah, so this is like a 7-hour video on
Oh
Reflex.
my
Yeah.
goodness.
And so he just goes in depth into like how you build it. And the nice thing is that he has chapters. So he talks about like, nav bars, click events, redirecting, data models. And so yeah, he pretty much goes off on this and is super in depth, and he's very compassionate, and goes slow enough that you can like really understand different details and things. And
Hmm.
so this is where I would point them.
I mean, that is very in depth. I mean, seven
7 hours, yeah.
hours is wild.
Yeah. For any If people make content, other content creators know that making even like a 1 minute video is hard. So to make a seven
Yes.
hour is insane.
Yes, 7 hours
Yeah.
is insane. And then to edit it,
Yeah, to
wow.
edit it. Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
question is, okay, great. So this brings us back to like what the initial goals and the audience for this tool is. So on the surface, it seems it has all the flexibility and limitations of a drag and drop editor, but requires knowledge of Python. I'm not trying to be, I don't know what that means, but I genuinely can't understand who this is for. So let me try to answer
Yeah.
this and then you can pop in. So like
Totally.
as someone who's seeing Reflex for the first time, my understanding is that Reflex is for Python engineers, essentially,
Yes.
who don't know JavaScript. So, like, if you know Python, you don't know JavaScript, you can use Reflex to build full stack applications using pure Python.
Yeah. I can
So
also.
that's who it's for. So like think of data engineers, think of backend engineers, any Pythonista that doesn't want to know JavaScript, essentially, I think is who Reflex is for. Tell me if you agree or if my understanding is a little skewed.
Yeah, totally. I think for me, I mean, it's for me, right? It's like for someone that I want to build an internal
Yeah.
tool quickly, and my background is in Python or data engineering or ML or just like doing pure backend. And
Mm.
my goal, right, my goal is to be able to like share something with my teammates that they can actually use. And what we'll see usually, especially in like finance, is like you'll have like a set of quants or you'll have a set of data scientists, and then they're doing some exploration in terms of a company initiative. And what ends up happening is that after they finish exploring and building some kind of prototype, that project gets handed off to essentially another team that has both back-end people and front-end people, and then their job is to like operationalize that within a company internally, because that's their next initiative, and that can take
Right.
4 or 5 months, right? And so it's like, hey, like if I'm already building all this stuff in Python, it's like I can go from an MVP to an actual internal app or an internal
Yeah.
service in much less time, because we don't have to convert a bunch of things. And this is
That's amazing.
yeah, even more emphasized because Reflex handles your state, right? So you don't have to write a bunch of boilerplate for like hooks and like sending events and things like that. And I think Baseline is kind of the best example, is because they literally went through IC, they have
Yeah.
customers, and everything is still in Reflex. Yeah, so it's like that's a pretty
It's
awesome
an
example. Yeah,
excellent example.
yeah, yeah,
This is really cool. I had no idea that you could build a full stack apps with Python.
yeah,
I remember was it last year or a few years ago? I saw something about writing HTML with Python, or like Python in HTML, or something about Python, HTML, Python on the web. I don't really remember what it is, but this is so much better than what I saw because that really
yeah,
didn't intrigue me because I was like, what are you talking about? It's Python.
yeah.
But going from zero to hero with Reflex seems very doable,
Super
and
doable.
it's definitely going into my toolbox when I'm doing and building demos for all the work
Yeah,
that I do.
and what I can add on this person's question is like the Reflex website, right? Like if you look at this,
Yeah.
like there are 23,000 Python files that go into the Reflex website, right? And so like this is probably the best example you have of kind of like a production grade app, a web app,
Hmm.
that's like sufficiently large, that's open source, right? And so like all of the docs, for example, are also in Reflex, right? And so one of the cool things, for example, is like this is a Markdown doc. We essentially have this Python code block, and
Hmm.
they built something internally for parsing Markdown and also being able to make these code
Wow.
snippets runnable, right? So if I go to this page on like how Reflex works, I go to the blog. It's So like this is written in Markdown. So I have this Markdown
Right.
here. I can see I'm embedding some code, and so we can actually see the code. But like being able to do Python demo exec makes this code runnable, right? So like if I were to like write my name
Oh,
here, this actually ends up running. I don't know if I did that
that
right.
is amazing.
Yeah, and so yes, I think if you have any questions about like whether or not Reflex can handle your workload, I would look at this Reflex web repository because there's a bunch of things going on in here, and there's like hundreds of pages on this website, and it's all in Python.
Yeah.
And your docs, like they're not like a subdomain, right? They're actual subpage, things like that.
Right. It's
Yeah,
Markdown.
yeah, it's totally marked down. So
I'll say that being able to blog and write just regular stuff in Markdown, it's so helpful
yeah,
because it's just
super
like,
helpful.
you're just writing where you build and it makes it a lot more approachable and you'll actually do it probably.
Yeah,
Nice. I mean, if nobody else has any more questions, I think I'm all out of questions.
nice.
Do you think
Yeah.
the Reflex team would allow us to choose how we want our backend to be compiled or bundled up? So like I like using Flask.
Oh, you
Would
like
that be an
Flask?
option instead of Fast
Uh,
API?
so that isn't an option. It's not an option, but you can do the reflex export thing where you end up just exporting your components, and then you can always write your own backend that connects those components.
No, thank you.
Yeah, so there's that escape hatch. Yeah, and then I guess
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last thing to mention is that uh, we where was that counter app? So so typically you'll reflex init to make a new project. After you make it, you can reflex run. But Reflex is also making it really easy to deploy. So you can just write like
Oh.
Reflex deploy. I guess I never actually.
Wait, you can host your project with Reflex.
Yeah, totally. So you can host your project with Reflex, and
What?
then yeah. So after I run this, yeah. So it's pretty similar to like how like Vercel is a hosting platform for Next.js. It's like Reflex is going to be the core web framework for Python and the Python community, and then you can host it also with Reflex, right? So I can do like Reflex deploy, and then I can actually serve this to the web. And so
And
yeah,
do they support like custom domains and stuff?
I'm not sure. That's definitely on the roadmap. I don't know if it's been launched yet though. And so I guess a quick example is like this UI framework we were talking about earlier. Like this is hosted
Yeah.
on Reflex. You can see it's Reflex
Yeah,
run.
I see.
Yeah. And so
Interesting.
this is what so I can like see I have a project, and then I can like upload things to my project after I log
Yeah.
in, and I can just deploy it. So I can like very easily go from, an idea to something that I host in like same day.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
It's like between Reflex and Astro, I have no excuses to not be building more,
Building more stuff.
apart from the lack of time.
Yeah, timely. Especially as a dev role, you get pulled in a lot of places.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Requests from every
This
team.
is
Yeah.
they said same here. Yeah, it's just like between these tools that still allow us to code in the languages that we love,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
just makes it a lot more seamless. It's a great time to be a developer. I swear.
An
I
amazing
swear
time.
it.
I'm looking forward to like my sister, she turned 14 yesterday, and it's like I'm looking forward to her like having these tools and doing things like
Yeah.
3 times as fast as when I had first learned how to code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy how fast these things are changing. But thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for coming
Yep.
on, Elvis, and
Sure.
chatting to us about Reflex. This is amazing. I am in love with Reflex right now. I really
Definitely.
just want to play with it all weekend, but there's like grocery shopping and cooking and all that stuff that needs to get done. But anything else you want to say to the folks before we wrap up?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely say check out the LLM templates. LLMs are super powerful, and a lot of the boilerplate is already there with regards to like connecting to like Olama if we're doing things locally, or if you want like a local RAG app. I've found like reg apps to be super helpful, even for like my personal life, where I like, I'll export, all of my bookmarks. I'll like
Ooh,
scrape them, and then I'll put them into a rag app, and then I can like search through everything I bookmarked, things like that. And so
ooh.
yeah. So it's like, yeah, definitely check out the LLM templates because it gets you like 90% of the way there. It's just a matter of adding your data.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, check out the LLM templates. Also, check out the UI components
Yeah.
that he shared for Reflex, and check out Reflex. And if you like it enough, be sure to become a contributor of Reflex. I saw like a bunch of issues that you all could probably dig into. But thank you so much for joining us on another great episode of Open Source Friday. We will see you next week where we dig into another amazing project.
Nice.
Until then, happy weekend. Bye.
Yes. See you, everyone.
The February 2025 updates to Visual Studio Code make Copilot an even more powerful AI pair programmer. For starters, until now, GitHub Copilot in VS Code's editor worked from your cursor position. Next edit suggestions means Copilot can now offer suggestions on the next edit you might need based on the changes you've been making. We started creating a runner class, but after creating the constructor, we get an error because we forgot to set up the fields. Next edit suggestions detects we probably want those fields, so makes those suggestions. We can manually accept or reject by using the icon on the left or select tab to complete the operation. Next edit suggestion then suggests a getInfo method to provide read access to the runner data. Let's accept these by selecting tab to move to the edit and then tab again to perform the accept. Now it's time to add in shoe preferences. Copilot suggests brand and size, and after creating the interface, Next Edit Suggestions realizes we likely want this on the runner. It adds the field, the update to the constructor, and then finally to the getInfo method, allowing me to tab through all the suggestions and code that much faster. Looking at a larger task, we have a website called Runner Tracks, which has a page that shows the results of a race. We want to improve the paging for our table as there can often be a lot of participants. We can use Copilot Chat to make a change to the spell file we have open here. I'm going to use the model picker and choose one of our newest options, OpenAI's O3 Mini. We ask Copilot Chat to make the buttons look prettier, then apply the suggested changes. Let's check, and yes, those blue buttons look much nicer, so let's accept the change. With that complete, let's keep iterating. We want to let the user select how many rows they want on each page. This will require more than just one file change. Copilot edits can make suggestions across a number of files. We can let Copilot find the files to change, but let's add in a few files to the working set and then ask for the change. You'll see in this case, I'm using Claude 3.5 Sonnet, demonstrating the ability to select different models. Copilot Edits has the suggested changes to all three of those files in one go. It even gives me a summary of the changes it's made. Let's save, take a look at the site, and there we go, a working dropdown to select how many rows the table should display. However, our team has even more suggestions for the UI. And what more common way to explain what they want than a screenshot with some hand-drawn markup? Until now, Copilot Chat could only work with text, but now Copilot has vision capabilities. We can attach the image by pasting and ask Copilot to implement the changes shown in the image. We'll apply those changes, save the file, have a look at our website, and sure enough, the column alignment has been fixed, and just from a screenshot. Let's turn our attention to an even more complex task. Our Runner Tracks website has a page listing races, and we want the ability to search for a race by name. This is going to require changes to a number of files in our project: services, server-side code, UI, and tests. Copilot now supports agent mode, allowing it to reason and iterate over an entire project to perform complex operations. Copilot starts by exploring our project to determine what updates need to be made. It begins updating the backend service, and then the UI, making the necessary changes. Once it completes those, it turns its attention to the tests. The unit tests for the service and the page, and the end-to-end tests. With the tests updated, we're then prompted to run the unit tests. Our unit tests fail because the existing ones didn't align with the new functionality. Copilot detects this issue and makes the changes, prompting us to then rerun the tests. When those succeed, we're prompted then to run the end-to-end tests. We can see I forgot to stop another testing process that was using the port. Fortunately, Copilot is there to help me out, generating the command to stop the process and run the tests. Everything passes, and if I look at the website one more time, I can see the new functionality. Finally, let's build some backend services. We want to allow our Runner Tracks website the ability to associate races with fundraisers. We need a fundraiser service modeled like the other ones we have in our app. It needs to understand the structure and the schema we've been using in the rest of our code base. If we ask Copilot naively to create the service, it lacks the necessary context to both understand that underlying schema and how we want the service to be constructed. Context is key whenever we're working with AI. Let's start things over, but this time we'll reference a prompt file to give more specific information about how we want things implemented. Prompt files are markdown files kept in the .github/prompts folder of your project. They can even reference other files, in this case a Prisma schema that describes the shape of our database. We have notes about our code preferences, and we've even included a template for how we want our services constructed. When we send the prompt again, you can see that extra context means Copilot does a much better job this time. This looks like exactly what we want, thanks to Copilot and our prompt file. With the new updates to Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot, you have an additional set of capabilities to allow you to be even more productive.